Hi, and welcome to Prepping Essentials.
Well, I'm just busy charging up the the portable battery box that I've got. I use that for portable power, and for the last few months it's been sitting in the polytunnel providing power for the watering system. And even on what is a grey overcast morning, it's only 9 o'clock, so there's a distinct lack of sun this morning. Even on a grey day like this, we're still pulling in, I don't know if you'll be able to see or not, yeah, 12.4 volts going into the battery. I've had a couple of comments recently on off-grid power, so I thought perhaps I'd do a lessons learned on that subject. Well, welcome to another lessons learned video. Subject today really has been prompted by a couple of things. A couple of comments on recent videos and the fact that I've just been putting my battery box onto charge, and it's a subject of off-grid energy. We're quite fortunate in Western countries, probably the majority of countries, for people who are viewing these videos as preppers. And why do you think that is? Why is it that people in Western or more developed countries who are into the prepping lifestyle focus on these things, whereas people in underdeveloped countries don't? Simple answer really. They're already preppers. Their lifestyle on a normal day is a prepping kind of lifestyle, because in those countries the mains utility services are either fragile or in many cases they're non-existent. So the things that we do as preppers, they do every single day. It's just called normal life, which is a bit bizarre and deep if you sit and think about it for a while. We are fortunate in the West, and we do take the supply chain and the grid services very, very much for granted. And it's only really when they break down that panic sets in and we wonder what we're going to do next. So as preppers, we're kind of getting ourselves geared up so that in the event that that does happen, we can kind of have some kind of continuity of lifestyle. Bit of a long intro there, apologies for that, I kind of went off on a tangent, but it's true. Yeah, so in my personal circumstances here in the UK, the mains utility grid network is consistent, and it's fairly rare that we actually lose the grid, whether that's our Wi-Fi connections, our mains water supply, or mains gas and electric. And I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've lost electricity over the last 4 to 5 years. Very rare. I think I had one short outage back end of last year, coming towards Christmas time, when I woke up in the early hours of the morning listening to burglar alarms going off all around me. And it was because mains power had gone out and it triggered the alarm on those systems. But it's interesting to note what a catastrophic effect that has when that happens. Okay, short outages, we can bimble around with a flashlight, and if it's off for no more than a few hours, whatever we've got stored in our refrigerators and freezers isn't going to be lost, because the power will come back on, and most modern refrigeration or freezing appliances can survive for quite long periods of time, probably about 7 or 8 hours before you start to have water leaking out of them, and you're a little bit suspect about the food contents. But anything more than that, you're going to lose everything that's in those refrigerators and freezers. And indeed, somebody commented literally just yesterday on one of the videos, I think it was a cabin talk that I've done on Saturday, and they were asking about power for fridges and freezers. So that's kind of prompted me to do this little lessons learned today on the subject of energy off-grid. I'll kind of focus more on the electricity side today rather than the cooking or heating side, because that is a bit more varied and in-depth. For electricity, there are really two methods. You can either go for a petrol generator, portable petrol generator, which will give you mains power, or you can go for the solar option, or indeed you can mix and match both. I do have a petrol generator. It's 2000 watts, so it provides for pretty much everything that I would need in a normal home. The only limitation with petrol generators really is the wattage, and 2000 watts is probably the smallest you can get away with. It'll happily power smaller domestic appliances, so it'll certainly provide power for fridges, freezers, things like food mixers, but it will start to struggle if you're producing heat. So whilst it'll cope with a kettle, a small domestic kettle, when you get into things like microwave ovens or those convection type grill type ovens, then you do need a bigger power device. 2000 watts, if you choose your microwave oven carefully, as I've done, then it will power a microwave oven. Anything larger, you will struggle and you'll need to upgrade to a bigger machine, so 3000, 4000 watts and upwards really. They are great. They're small enough to carry. They're not exactly the lightest things in the world. They're probably about 20 kilos, 25 kilos for some of them. And they'll quite happily chug away for, I think mine runs for about 4 hours before it needs refuelling. And therein lies the key, refuelling. Clearly they're running on petrol, so you're going to require a store of petrol cans so that you can refuel. But mine, it takes about 4.5 litres, around about a gallon of fuel, and as I say, it runs for about 4 hours. So if you start multiplying that out, if you've got that generator running for an extended period of time, you are going to get through an awful lot of petrol. Now okay, you're really only going to use it for things like cooking or using power tools, perhaps lighting, so it isn't going to be on continuous running for the full 4 hours. But it is quite surprising. You want to start using power tools to do a job around the cabin or the home, or you stop for lunch and you make some lunch, or if you're working at night time, it is surprising how quickly you will get through it. And fuel is not easy to store. It takes up space, and it is quite hazardous because it's designed to burn or explode. So you do have to be a little bit careful when you're storing it. Depending on where you are in the world, there could well be restrictions on how much you can store. So you need to bear that in mind as well. So they are great items for high output, stable power supply, but there are downsides, particularly around use of fuel. And if you were in a extended grid down scenario for any length of time, you are going to quickly use up whatever stocks of fuel that you've set aside, and resupply might not be an option. So that kind of brings me to the second source of energy, and it's the one that I use every single day, day in, day out, 24 hours a day actually in the cabin, and that's solar. So I've done quite a few videos on solar. If you spool back through the channel list, you'll pick those up, and there's a whole world of YouTube channels dedicated to solar out there, whether that's manufacturers or whether that's people who are off-grid and they've gone through the process of setting up and then maintaining their systems on a day-by-day or week-by-week basis. So without getting into too much technicality, because it can go very, very technical and deep, I just thought I'd run through simple setups, what you can use them for, what you can't use them for, and points to consider when you're thinking about making a solar setup off-grid, and what you will have to bear in mind as you live with that system through the days, weeks and months. So in terms of what is a system and what's it made up of, it is fairly simple, to be honest. First of all, you need to capture the energy from the sun to convert it into electricity, and that's what your solar panels do. They come in various sizes, shapes and power capacities, but for powering an off-grid cabin, then you are going to need to go for the bigger panels. You'll see lots on Amazon and eBay for trickle charging your car batteries, or for providing power for water fountains in your garden, or indeed, as I do, powering a water supply for things like polytunnels. But they're generally quite low voltage and not really able to provide a significant amount of power for your off-grid living in a cabin. So solar panels. Next part of the system is a little device called a solar charge controller. Essentially, it's a little box which takes the power from the solar panels and then in a managed way outputs that power either to direct consumption through lighting, for example, or more importantly, to put that power into a storage system that you can use later to draw on when the sun is not shining and the panels aren't providing the power. And that storage system is essentially your batteries. So three main components: the panels themselves, a small box, for want of a better description, the charge controller, which manages the power output from the panels, and then your storage capability, your batteries. Three items. And again, they come in various sizes and capacities depending on how much power you need. And with a solar setup, therein lies the crux of the problem. And I'll kind of use my cabin as an example. If you're living in a home, a normal domestic environment, and you take a look at all of the things that you use that are powered by electricity, and add those up, it's a substantial amount of power that you're using. We're talking several thousands of watts of power per hour, and ultimately per day, per week, per year. A couple of examples: domestic light bulb. Okay, we have gone through a radical change over the last few years as we've transitioned from your basic carbon filament light bulb through to low energy and more modern LED lighting, and the power consumption has dropped significantly. Your old electric lights used to draw 100 watts of power every hour that they were on. Whereas modern LED lights, you can probably half that for decent illumination. Think about things like your kettle. You're talking probably 1,000 watts. Your microwaves, you're talking a couple of thousand upwards watts. Domestic ovens, several thousands of watts. And then all of the other things like your TVs, your video recorders, your vacuum cleaners, your food mixers. The list is endless of appliances that you use every single day. And the big reality check you're going to have as you transition off grid is that unless you have significant financial resources at your disposal, forget those items, those appliances. You're just not going to be able to power that volume of appliances. So you need a bit of a rational rethink in the way that you use energy. Second thing is that mains power is higher voltage. You're talking in the UK 220 volts, 220 volts. In America 110 volts. It's a lot of power. So as you transition to an off-grid lifestyle, it is far better to do whatever you can to reduce the amount of power that you're going to need to provide from your generator or from your solar system. And the key there is to drop from mains power supply to 12 volt supply, such as you would find in your car or van, or if you have them, caravans and camper vans. Far less power consumption than you get in a mains grid scenario. So that means that your method of generating power can be substantially smaller in scale, and you can power those appliances for a lot longer duration. Okay, you can still use mains power supply appliances in an off-grid scenario. For that, you will need to convert your 12 volt power back to 220 or 110 mains power, and you do that through something called an inverter. Again, small box, 12 volt goes in one end from your solar panels or your batteries. It converts that power, steps it up into 220 or, in the American case, 110 volts. There is a sacrifice, however. There is always with everything in life. There is a sacrifice in that the conversion process draws power as well as the appliance that you're ultimately powering through that inverter. So again, back to basics. Seriously consider what are the essential items that you would need to power, and try and stay away from domestic style appliances. Okay, so back to our cabin and our off-grid lifestyle. For the majority of things, 12 volts is perfectly adequate for essential items. So you can quite easily illuminate with lighting, LED lighting, very little power consumption required. Moving water around, because remember the grid's down, you're going to have to physically do that yourself. Again, 12 volt pumps, very little power. For charging up things like mobile phones, if you still have them, of course, in a grid down scenario. More likely for charging radios, two-way radios. Very easy, very simple, very limited power draw on your system. Laptops, tablets, your normal kind of tech appliances. Just because the grid's down doesn't necessarily mean that you can't still use your tablets and laptops. Whilst you won't necessarily have access to the internet, if you've thought ahead of the game and transferred all of your prepping and gardening books onto your laptop, you'll still have those as a source of reference material if and when the grid goes down. Whereas if you're reliant on the internet, you won't. You won't be able to just pop on YouTube to see how to do something when the grid goes down. So a little top tip there. Get some reference books or documents transferred electronically onto a laptop or a tablet so that you still have those accessible for you when the grid does go down. Kind of digressed there a little bit. So yeah, for normal routine things, lighting, recharging devices, powering your water pumps, very, very simple, very, very easy and low. In a long-term grid down scenario, you would still be advised to have some kind of refrigeration or freezing if you can. I'm not talking about your huge walk-in style freezers that many households have nowadays, but smaller fridges, freezers. I'd err on the side of the freezer rather than the fridge, because really the only object of having those things would be long-term storage of meat. You don't have to have a fridge for storing your tomatoes, lettuce and milk and butter in. There are other ways of having those items without having to have a fridge. So the amount of refrigeration devices that's available in 12 volt is quite limited, certainly in terms of size, and they are horrendously expensive as well. So it would be better and easier and cheaper to use your domestic items that run on mains power and simply have one of those inverters that I talked about earlier. So that's kind of an idea of what you can get away with in terms of powering off your off-grid system. That kind of brings us around to the subject of how much power do you need and how are you going to gather in and store that power. There are lots of YouTube videos, if you go out and have a look, where you can see conversion tables, and essentially you just look at what it is you want to power, count up how many lights you might want, your water pump, a little bit of a guesstimate of how many times you might want to charge your laptop, your mobile phone. More importantly, things like torch batteries or radio batteries. And then if you are going down the road of having some kind of refrigeration, or indeed if you wanted things to be able to cook, such as a microwave, then tot up all of the things that need power, and it'll bring you to a grand total figure, and you can use those conversion tables to figure out how much battery storage capacity it is that you need, and then ultimately you can calculate how much power would be drawn on a daily basis, and thereby how much power you would need to draw in from the sun on any given day to replenish those batteries. It does get very, very complicated depending on how big a system you want or need to power your off-grid lifestyle. I can't possibly go into it on this video, and indeed I am not expert enough to work out all of the different equations. It does get quite complicated and geeky, and you'll know from my videos that's not me. I kind of just make it up as I go along and live and learn through experience. But here in the cabin, you'll have seen as I did the setup, I've kind of got a bare essential setup right now. I do want to expand, but it's not a cheap hobby to do that. So I am kind of adding to the system as the months or years go by. There's no way that I could suddenly pop up an off-grid power supply here on the cabin, which is sufficient to replace what I have in my home. It just wouldn't, I couldn't do it financially. So I've gone for a, what do I need essentials to get me started, with a little bit of spare capacity, and gradually as I settle into this off-grid lifestyle, I'll gradually expand as I go along. So you'll have seen from previous videos, on the cabin roof right now I've got two panels, 100 watts each. I've got a third backup panel which is portable. I use that to charge things like a battery box, or even just to plug my phone into to recharge on a sunny day rather than depleting my cabin batteries. So 200 watts of power coming in on any given day from the roof through my charge controller, and that feeds into four, they're called leisure batteries. You can't use car batteries, I'll tell you that right now. There is a difference between car batteries and what they call leisure batteries, things that you would find in a caravan or a camper van. So I've got 4 leisure batteries. Each of those batteries is 110 amp hours. So if I combine all those up, I'm heading towards 500 amp hours of battery storage. However, I did say this was complicated. Bear in mind that these batteries aren't designed to be completely discharged. So even though you might have 500 amp hours worth of power stored in your battery at any given time, you can't just use all of that and then expect the solar panels to replace that. The panels wouldn't be able to do that all in one on a given day unless you had hundreds of them. And equally, the batteries are not designed for that kind of usage. They like you to gradually take power slowly until you get to around about half capacity of the battery, and that is your bare minimum. So when you're doing your calculations, they will tell you this on the YouTube channels, work on half of your battery capacity rather than your full battery capacity when you're doing your calculations. And essentially that's it. All you really need on top of those 3 main items is some electrical cable and some power outlets, so that you can run feeds from your battery around your cabin to power your lights, or to plug your phones or laptops into to recharge, or into direct feed things such as your water pumps and other items that might need continuous power. I did say earlier that I use my solar system every single day, every hour of the day, continuously, and I do. Whilst my lighting is not on, unless it's dark, and while my water pump isn't on, unless I'm actually running water in the sink or filling my water tanks to take out to the polytunnel, I do have one item that is continuously running, and that's my Wi-Fi. I've got an in-car Wi-Fi hub. Simply plugs into a 12-volt power outlet, so you can use it in your car, in your caravan or camper van, indeed anywhere where there's a 12-volt supply. So I have that running continuously. It's on 24 hours a day, providing Wi-Fi connectivity through a mobile phone SIM card. And that gives me the capacity to, if I want to, hang my mobile phone off that Wi-Fi and save my data. But more importantly, I use it, and you'll have seen in my videos, I use it as a Wi-Fi hub for my CCTV system. Which again brings us back to solar power, because if you've seen the videos, you'll know that my CCTV gets its power from the sun. Each of the cameras has rechargeable batteries in there, and there's a cable feed out from those batteries to a very small, and it is literally that big, solar panel. So I don't need to worry about recharging those. I don't need to worry about having a main supply for those. They just sit there 24 hours a day with their little panel. During the daytime, it trickle charges the battery. During night time, the cameras feed off that stored power in the battery. So I hope that was useful to you. I know that it's not in depth, and it's deliberately not in depth because it is a technical subject, but it hopefully will get you thinking about the need for energy of some description if the mains grid goes down, and B, the benefits of solar versus petrol generators. As I said, you will need fuel resupply. You will need quite a bit of maintenance on those as well. They do need to be serviced every so often, whereas solar kind of just does its own thing. And see what you can realistically do with your solar, and what you can't do, and just get you thinking about the whole subject of how much energy you use on a daily basis, and what would be critical versus nice to have, so that you can work out how much energy you use and will therefore need to find for an alternative supply. So thanks for listening to that. I'm going to finish off my coffee. I've got a couple of little small jobs to do, and then we'll look forward to the next video.
Well, that's it for this video. I hope there was something in there that was of interest to you. If you did like the video, please do click on the like button. Also feel free to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. As always, I welcome any comments, questions or suggestions you might have. Feel free to leave them in the comments section below. But for now, thanks for watching and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.